Good afternoon and welcome everybody to Eurofound's webinar on flexible work in a digital age. Is everyone a winner? My name is Irene Mandl. I'm head of the research unit employment at Eurofound. Eurofound is a European agency conducting research cross-comparative across Europe related to working conditions and living conditions across the countries. And in that framework, one of our research topics is strongly discussed everywhere currently in Europe. It deals with the future of work in a digital age. Today we are here to discuss one specific work arrangement in a digital age, which we call the ICT-based mobile work. And by that we mean a work organization where workers can be employees, but also self-employed, do some or all of their tasks away from a fixed workplace. That can be a coffee shop, it can be the airport, or it can simply be on the road, for example, in a train. And we as Eurofound have done a lot of research on this topic, and we experienced that it offers good advantages for both the workers and the employers, but there are also some risks involved. And today we are here to discuss with a group of experts what these opportunities and challenges could be. I have here with me Oscar Vargas, who is a research officer at Eurofound and did most of the research that we have conducted at Eurofound in the last couple of years on this topic. Next to him, we have Emmanuelle Brun from the EU Agency for Occupational Safety and Health, and she will bring in her expertise related to safety and health matters in a digital age. Next to Emmanuelle, we have Anne-Marie Nicot from ANACT, which is a French agency for improving working conditions at the national level. And she will give us some examples of what the French governments have been doing to make sure that ICT-based mobile work can be done in a decent way. And finally, we have here next to me Sabina Martinez Moreno, who is a self-employed engineer from Spain, and she will give us very practical examples because she's an ICT-based mobile worker herself. So you're all very welcome, and we are looking forward to interesting discussions with you. But it's not only our panel who will be active today, it's also you as our audience whom we would invite to get involved in our webinar. We will pose one or the other poll question during this session, and you also have the possibility to post comments or ask questions through the chat function. But before we start with that, I would ask our panelists over here to start with answering a question. Why does ICT-based mobile work matter to you? How are you related to this work organization? Oscar, can you start, please?
Yes, thank you, Irene. I have a background of health and safety, and here in Eurofound, I'm a researcher, and of course in the area of working conditions. And I first approached the issue of ICT-based mobile work when I was studying the flexible organization of working time, and we found that this type of work really makes a difference in organization of working time. And since then, I think I'm related to this topic.
Oh, thank you. Emmanuelle?
Well, it's clear that this type of ICT-based mobile work is getting more and more widespread. And for EU OSHA, it is important to make sure that employers, workers, but also policymakers have the adequate information to better manage the risks associated with that in order to maximize the opportunities. And at EU OSHA, the opportunities of ICT-based mobile work are valued, and we have some rules for the staff. So in fact, I benefit of this type of work myself. So I could be more productive in my plane to Dublin yesterday, and I can also sometimes better balance my work and caring for my young twin daughters. So.
Thank you, very interesting. Anne-Marie, what's your perspective?
Yes, there are quite many issues related to mobile work. Today I will mainly focus on the one. This is related to the fact that some workers, usually white-collar qualified workers, do some work at home in the evening, in the weekend, on vacations. So in some way they keep connected out of working hours. And this is one subject. There are other, but this is one subject. And what we see is that this situation results also from a form of intensification and fragmentation of white-collar worker for many reasons, in which ICT is a part, but it's not all the explanation. I mean, there are many changes in the organization. There are new tasks given to managers, even clerical tasks. So there are many things contributing to this situation.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Sabina?
In my case also, I used this system of work because it permits me to lead between with my family situation and work situation, because I have a daughter. So this system permits me to bring the office at home. A part of this also because of economics. Okay, the systems avoid you to have an office and to travel to the office, so it gives you benefits economics.
Okay, fine. So that means we've already touched now about a couple of elements that we find specific, but at the end, neither ICT nor doing work remotely is something really new. So Oscar, to start with, can you tell us what does we as Eurofound understand by this work organizational arrangement of ICT-based mobile work, and why do we consider it as a new form of employment?
ICT-based mobile work, it is a flexible way of organizing work. And I mean by flexible that workers under this arrangement are able to work in any place and any time. In this sense, it is flexible working time arrangement.
Okay, and do you have any indications about how many workers in Europe use this work arrangement?
Well, according to our research and using the European Working Conditions Survey, we can tell that at least 1 in 5 workers in Europe work on this arrangement. Nevertheless, we have to also, it's important to know that there are differences across Europe. For example, in countries like Denmark, up to 30% of the workers are in this arrangement, whereas in other countries like Italy, for example, we have only 7% of them in this arrangement.
So there are big differences, right? Do you have any assumption where do you come from?
Well, we have some assumptions, and I can tell you, Irene, that it is very much related first to the culture of work. There are some countries where flexible work is more common, also where there is flatter organizations and not so hierarchical, it's more likely that workers work flexibly using ICT, but also you look at the countries where this work arrangement is more frequent, for example, Scandinavian countries or Holland, we see that all these countries have developed regulation on flexible work, whereas other countries haven't done so much.
Okay, so that seems it's not only about the technology, there are also other factors influencing that, like you say, culture or legislation. So bearing that in mind, do we see any developments over time? Is it growing? Is it a stable trend? What do you think it will be in the future?
You never know the future, but we can tell that, and we have experienced all of us, the technological changes. And we see that our smartphones, etc., become more sophisticated. So interconnectivity through internet has advanced a lot. We can work actually from anywhere, anytime, and this is developing very fast. In this regard, I would say that very likely more and more workers in different sectors will be able to work flexibly with ICTs. I'm just going to give you one example. For example, Sweden in 2003, if we compare 2003 with 2014, the number of companies that reported that they have teleworkers have doubled in the scope of 10 years. We don't know what's going to be the future, but for sure, the trend is that this type of work will increase.
So at least we have seen a big growth in the last years in at least some countries. So Anne-Marie mentioned in the beginning the managers. Is this only a work organization that managers or IT people are using, or could it in principle be used by everybody, any sector?
it is true that this type of work has been first developed in the context of ICT experts, IT companies, also in financial sector, also in the public sector, mostly in services, because services are the type of work where workers use very much ICT. But also thinking about what type of occupations are working under this arrangement, we see that, of course, the majority of them are higher skilled workers who they need to work everywhere because of the occupation. But also we see mid workers, skilled workers using this technology. And I'm going to give you two examples, sales workers and clerks. It's very common that they also work remotely with ICT.
Thank you. So I think we got a good impression what this work organization type is about, and Oscar also gave us some indications about how many workers and how the trend in the past was. Now I would suggest we do a first poll. So it's up to you as the audience to give us your opinion. What do you think? How will ICT-based mobile work develop in the future? Will it grow? And if so, for everybody or only for selected occupations or sectors? Or do you think that has kind of reached its limits and where we are? So please give us your opinion and we'll look at your answers then in a couple of minutes. So now, Oscar, another question to you. The title of our webinar is Everybody a Winner? Yes. So that implies there are not only good things, there might also be bad things. So can you tell us a little bit what our research brings about on what could be the benefits and what could be the disadvantages of this work arrangement?
Well, as I said before, this work arrangement offers flexibility to both the company and the worker. And in principle, the ability of the worker to organize their work should be an indication of good job quality. Because the worker, especially it's very typical among high-skilled workers, that they have a high level of autonomy to organize their work. And on top of that, they have a lot of flexibility to work at the time they want to work, so that they can combine very well, in principle, the job demands with, let's say, for example, family demands or other activities. So in principle, it's a good arrangement that can have very positive results. However, as some of you know, this type of arrangement also brings some downsides. We found, for example, that, let me continue talking about these high-skilled workers. They normally have a lot of autonomy, and they use sometimes this autonomy to prolong the working hours during the day. For example, when they are in a situation of high level of job demands, now with the technology, we can go home and continue working. This is what we call supplemental work. And this is actually one of the main aspects that have consequences for the working time. Absolutely. We have to say very clearly, workers under this arrangement are more likely to work longer working hours.
So we have a kind of a paradox there. On the one hand, it's good for work-life balance. On the other hand, we have a likelihood of longer working hours. Is
exactly.
That right?
That's correct, Irene, but not only longer working hours. Also, they tend to work more irregular working hours, so they don't have a clear schedule. And they also, we found recently in our last analysis of the survey, that they also report that they don't have enough rest. According to the Working Time Directive, workers has to have at least 12 hours of rest between 2 working days, and we find there is a much higher share of workers that don't follow this rest in this group of workers. And of course, this in the end have consequences for our health and well-being.
You mean in terms of the stress levels and risk for burnout, for example? So
yeah,
this type of effects?
Yes, that we consider some of the issues we mentioned before. First, doing supplemental work, which means working longer. Potential work-family conflicts, because you work alone, you work even at home in a family environment. This can have consequences for your family life and have some stress. But also, some of these workers are more exposed to constant availability from the employers. And we see very clear in our results from the European Working Conditions Survey that they report more often that they have interruptions. What are the consequences of this work environment for the health of the workers? We found very clear, especially the report, more stress and more anxiety than other workers. But together with this, also more likely to report sleeping disorders, for example. So this is very serious. And one consequence of this type of work, also for the health of the workers or for the work organization, is what we found recently, and we have named virtual presentism. We know that presentism is when the worker is sick but goes to work. This is a presentism. We see in some sectors more than others, but very clear, workers under this arrangement, when they are sick, instead of calling sick to the company, as many of us do sometimes, they remain at home to continue working. And this is something which is, we don't know very well what could be the consequences in the long term. And they can also, of course, go to the workplace and working from the computer. It is not a physical demanding job. Anyone being sick can be sitting in front of a computer. But what we have to ask ourselves is, what are the consequences for the long-term health of the worker? And what are the consequences for the productivity of the company, for example?
So that means there is some incentive that we use these technologies on the one hand to make our lives easier, to help us in our working life, but at the same time they also put some incentive to us that might decrease the quality of our working conditions. So having heard that, Emmanuel, you as our health and safety expert, what are, from your perspective, the implications of that? What are the concerns if we are doing things like virtual presentism or long working hours or unsocial working hours?
Well, first, I fully agree with the effect that Oscar has mentioned. It is in line with our research. And I will insist that the balance between the benefits and the challenges very much depends on whether the worker feels the flexibility is real for the workers and the benefits are felt for the workers, or if it's imposed by the employer. That's one point. It also depends very much on the form of employment. If we are employees, self-employed or pseudo self-employed with different levels of job autonomy, of social support, of job security, which also impact on these factors are the strongest factors associated with good mental health and well-being. So it depends on the conditions, on how it's implemented. From our point of view, the key concerns are the psychosocial effects of all these issues you mentioned, 24/7 availability, long working hours, overload, but also very important, the blurred boundaries between work and private life. So this inability to disconnect from work, and I know we will talk about the right to disconnect later, this spillover from work into private life is a source of, as you said, of stress, of sleeping disorder, of anxiety, and of burnout. And in fact, there is an addiction, a real addiction, which is called digital addiction, also fear of missing out syndrome, scientifically called nomophobia. So it's the dependency on the technology, whereby individuals having this addiction can suffer severe anxiety from not being able to use this device anymore. And there is an estimation that up to 8% of population in the US, but also in the EU, would suffer this type of anxiety. So as you said, it's very serious.
Yeah. And I guess there's also something that most of us and our audience has already experienced. We are kind of getting reliant on our mobile phones, being connected, reading emails every time, everywhere. So I think that is probably something that we need to take better into account. So is it fair to say that while in, let's say, a few decades ago, there was more focus on the physical health and because of tasks were more related to manual work, and now we should be more thinking, as you say, about psychosocial risks and the mental wellness of the workers?
Well, we at EU OSHA have been working on the psychosocial effect and stress also for a long time. We had the first European campaign on the effects of stress in 2003, I think. So, but it's true that and it's good, there have been a raising awareness about the psychosocial effect. But I would like to emphasize that the more physical aspects of the work, in particular musculoskeletal disorders, so neck, back, and shoulder pains, are still the major work-related concern in the EU. It's the most common work-related disorder, so that is not yet solved. And when we talk now about ICT-based mobile work, so we have the psychosocial effects, but there is also the issue of the poor ergonomics of the work equipment. So like laptop, tablets, phones, of the work equipment, and also of the workstation. So for the work equipment, in fact, small devices are not recommended for a long period of office type of work because the keyboard is not ergonomic, because it's sometimes virtual, too small, because the screen reflects too much light. So these devices are not adequate for longer periods of work. Okay. And also the workstation. I mean, sitting in an airport, the chair is certainly not adaptable on your couch either. So here, when you talk about mobile work, you have in fact the combination of risks of musculoskeletal disorders, so the physical risks, and also the psychosocial effects. And there is a growing body of evidence that this combination is even more detrimental to physical health even.
That's very interesting, and it triggers also a good number of questions from the audience. So, first one that I would like to pose to the two of you based on what you have said. There is a question asking whether we know whether there are certain group of workers that are more or less affected by the potential negative effects. So could it be certain occupational groups, gender, age classes? Do you have any information on that?
Do you want me to come? Okay. What we see is that I talked before about the potential negative effects of this work arrangement. And in our research, we have differentiated between different types of workers doing ICT-based mobile work. And we have classified them according to the frequency they are in this arrangement. We have the high mobile workers, the regular home-based teleworkers, and those doing only this work occasionally. And we see very clearly that those workers who are very mobile and work with high frequency with these technologies are more likely to report the negative effects. And this is very clear. And I think this is the group of workers that we have to focus on. Those, but if the question is about what group of workers in terms of occupations, we find mainly high-skilled workers, clearly, but we have also sales persons doing this type of job, for example. And the difference is that the sales persons, for example, and some lower-skilled workers are less likely to have the autonomy that the high-skilled workers have. So in a way, the high-skilled workers are more able to cope with the time, even though they want to work longer and the inverted commas kill themselves. But the low-skilled workers don't have sometimes the resources. One example is salespersons.
Okay, so maybe to summarize the answer to the question from the audience, in a nutshell, one can say a little bit or some frequency of ICT-based mobile work, that is good, while if it becomes too intensive, too high frequency, that's where we run the health risk. Okay.
Yes, Irene.
Thank you. Well, maybe let's get back to the answer to our first question. What does our audience think? How will ICT-based mobile work develop in the future? Will it be a growing trend? Will it be a selective one? So I see from the results here that actually no one from our audience thinks it will not grow. There will be some future tendency, but at the same time, as Oscar also just mentioned in his response, while probably it can be some tasks for everybody, there are some trends to specific occupations and sectors. It's very interesting, so thanks for your contribution. And I would like to make your work even more. So let's do a second polling question. As we now have heard some of the issues that might be related to potential negative health effects or other negative impacts of this work arrangement, please again give us your opinion. What do you think could be the main challenges of ICT mobile work in the future? So as we've heard, the frequency makes a change, the intensity is decisive. There are already developments going on to limit that to some degree. And we have Anne-Marie here, who can give us some information on that, because in France, there was established the so-called right to disconnect, which aims to go into this direction. So can you tell us a little bit what this is about?
Yeah. Well, it was an article in the labor law in 2016, and before this labor law, there were some in some companies or in some branch, trade unions and employers were trying to find ways to make it possible to disconnect. So either by agreements or by some devices like a blocking server, email servers or things like that. And so in 2016, the labor law made it, well, in France, we have, there are some subjects on which companies have to negotiate. So on gender equality, on salaries, and well, on several issues. And so the law added the right to disconnection to the subject on which the companies have to negotiate. So, well, this is something good, and, well, they have to negotiate. They are not obliged to reach an agreement, because if there is no agreement, the company has just to write a charter. So, well, so this is a kind of soft law anyway. But the fact is that this was introduced because the basic right, as you said, the basic right to rest, the European Directive on the daily rest, and was not effective, and also because there is an issue on employers' responsibility on health and safety. So this right comes to reinforce other existing rights. And
it's supposed to be seen in a package. It's not a standalone thing directly driven by digitalization. It has a bigger background.
Yeah, there is a bigger background, and it's just another part to enforce existing rights. And so, of course, the major issue is how to make this effective.
And would you already have an example of how it could be made? So is it implemented in practice? Do companies do something?
I think that one agreement, which is very interesting, is the Orange Group, the telecom company. Orange agreement. It's an agreement which is much broader than just disconnection. It's an agreement on digitalization and its impact on skills and careers, and also on personal data, so on many issues. And one thing is interesting in this agreement is that they say that well, the right to disconnection is not enough because it acts on the consequences but not on the causes. And in fact, this agreement has been connected to another agreement on workload regulation. So we shift from technology to organization.
So it hits exactly what we said before. It's just one part if we would deal with digitalization. You need to have the overall perspective to make it effective.
Yeah, so, and this is quite interesting because even in this case, the two agreements, of course, improve things, but you need to make more steps to make it actual. A survey conducted in 2017 on about 500 managers showed that the majority of them were not so easy with the right to disconnect because first it's not well, the hierarchy is not necessarily fan of people who disconnect. So it's, well, in terms of culture, it's not yet something accepted. And but beyond that, it's the fact that the right to disconnection is that the fact that they will face more emails to deal with when they will connect again. So they will have more workload, or there is the risk to miss the change in an appointment or something like that. That is a problematic for them. So about half of them do not really disconnect, although it's.
May I come in on that, because we have another question from our audience which exactly asks for that. So if it obviously is a management thing, a culture in the enterprise, what can an employer do to bring that message across, that they do not necessarily want or need the workers to be online all the time, so that, you know, to kind of counteract the perception of the employees?
I think that, well, there are first the very basic things is that, for instance, well, maybe someone sends an email on non-working hours. If systematically it's written that this email does not require an answer in the, well, quick answer, yet it's already one message that you will find every time you receive, so you don't feel a rush on your email to say, yes, I can do this or that. So this is yet something. There are little things like that, but more deeply, we have to also consider the questions of work, as you said also, the question of work organization, workload, work fragmentation. So we have to deal also with this issue of what is work, how is it changing, and how can we do it so that people can do their work in a way that it is also satisfying for them. In the working time. Well, that's the basic. So there is a major issue related to workload, and that's, I may explain also what we did in the Orange group on this issue. Because talking about workload is a hot topic, and it's not really easy to talk about it between workers and managers. It's sometimes people don't feel, well, if I talk about workload, I will show that I have some difficulties, and the managers say, well, they will say that there is too much workload, I'm responsible. So it's not so easy. And for instance, to make it effective, to make its agreement effective, Orange contacted us to make a consultancy on this issue of workload regulation. So we have several principles on this consultancy. First, that the workload is a personal and collective issue. It means that, of course, it's personal because it's subjective. But it's also usually the causes and the solutions are also collective. So we have to deal with it collectively in a positive way, in a constructive way. That's why we choose to, well, it was a limited number of persons. Orange Group is 100,000 people in France. We just worked with 3 groups of dozens of experts. But what we chose was to ask the experts to make a photo report. We use this also in other companies, in other works, where we have real physical aspects of the work and people take pictures of the situation. In this case, it was a bit different because there was something so clearly to see. So the people choose more symbolic pictures to talk about their workload, but it was very interesting. For instance, some chose an iceberg, saying, well, data analyst, what is it, this job? And to show that the work, there is a part that people can see, and there are many other aspects that people don't see. And it was a way to talk together, because the picture was a base for people to debate on work. What is the work? Not only the workload, but what is the work? What is the problem of workload? What are the causes, the direct causes, but the more deeper causes, and what can be some solutions in the work. So it was an opportunity to talk about questions. And another,
I think we've heard now a very interesting example from a company, how companies could be dealing with that. But as we mentioned in the very beginning, ICT-based mobile work is not only an instrument for dependent employees, it's also for self-employed workers. And there we quite often already have the issue of high workload and long working hours. So Oskar, can you tell us a little bit, does our research find something on what matters as regards self-employment and ICT-based mobile work?
It is interesting because self-employed, by definition, have autonomy, which is one of the characteristics of the work under this arrangement, especially high-skilled workers. So it is. We found that it's very helpful for them in terms of, progressing in their business and for the career development. It's very helpful for self-employed. We find also that among the self-employed, there is half of them work under this arrangement with high frequency, which means that in theory, it's a big group of persons who are exposed to the risks we mentioned before. And because they have autonomy, for them, especially when they are dealing with clients, I think, I don't know if Sabina will agree with me, for them it's more difficult or more important to manage the boundaries between work and other aspects of life. A worker can say, okay, from 9 to 5, I need to stop because I have the right to disconnect, for example. But what happens in the case of self-employed?
Well, I think that's a good point. And we have an expert here, a practitioner.
Yes.
So, Sabina, tell us, you are working as an ICT-based mobile worker. Why do you choose for this work arrangement?
Okay, I'm freelance. I have my own company because I like to manage my own projects, and I work with the public and private sector. Okay, and 5 years ago I have a daughter. I used to work in an office before having my daughter. I used to work in an office, but because I have my daughter, I decided to translate my office to my home. What this system benefits to me because it permits me not to lose my clients first, to have more time to do both life, to do family life and work life, and to be connected fast. It was the perfect situation for me at that moment to go on with my company. So for me was an advantage at that moment. And nowadays that I have also an office, I keep on working at home. Why? Because I like these systems because I concentrate more. When you work in an office, you usually used to share because office is not cheap. In my case, I cannot rent an office for myself. So I have an office with a lot of co-workers where we can share the space, we can have a meeting room, and then it's nice because you can receive clients there. But to work, in my case, I feel more comfortable at home. So this system permits me to work home. When I have a meeting, to go to the meeting. So I have my information at home, in the office. So
So that
This
seems,
is the reason.
that seems it offers you both from an economic, from your business perspective, some advantages because you're better reachable for your clients, you can serve them better, but it also is good for your personal requirements, dealing with your daughter and making it more comfortable.
Correct.
So sounds like a good opportunity to work like that. But as we've been discussing before, there are also some negative things. So would you have recommendations to other self-employed? How can you make it work for self-employed? So how can you ensure that the positive aspects are higher than the potential disadvantages?
This is very nice to talk about, because for me this work to be here have been an own reflection about these worth or these disadvantages, because these systems are totally inside of our lives. So really, I think we are not conscious of how it's affecting really to our family lives, to our own life, no? So I recommend to have a scheduled times. I think it's imprescindible, okay, to be connected and to be disconnected is so important, because your brain needs to have these stops. And I recommend to do sport. I think it's very important to get this disconnection, or to do any activities that really don't permits you not to be connected. And I think it's important that the people that is using these systems needs to be trained. I miss, in my case, I miss information of how to manage these technologies and to use these, because they are very interesting, but to get the best result from them, but not to go against our health.
Okay, I think that's very interesting. Oscar, you want to come in?
I want to ask Sabina something. Sabina's from Barcelona, I'm from Madrid, but we are going to get on well anyway. We found that also that self-employed in general, I don't know if it is your case, they have more problems of working alone in isolation. And this is an issue for some of the ICT-based mobile workers, self-employed. And also sometimes, traditionally, they miss some support from colleagues because of this. We also find from our research, I don't know if it is in the real life, that ICTs help you to fight against these problems of isolation or lack of support from, I don't know, from clients, colleagues, or family, etc.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. My case is like this. For this, I was talking before that I prefer to work home because I concentrate then. In my case, I have a lot of meetings with co-workers and with clients. So when I need help, I'm connected.
Yeah.
Mobile, mail, or meetings, so we can organize and we can. And when I need to work, I prefer to be disconnected to concentrate. Yeah. Okay. And one thing that I forget to say is about the social networks. It's nice that we are so connected, but it's against us these much social networks that we have, that we are with technology, and we have work and personal all the time. So sometimes to make a strict line while you are working is not easy.
So you are less isolated, but more stressed.
Exactly, yeah.
We have a question from the audience again. Anna asks the panel, but I would like to maybe we start with you, whether we see some gender differences, whether ICT mobile work can help us for this work-life balance. So I think you just mentioned the example, it helps you as a mother. Do you think this is more a general trend, or can it be equally good then for men?
I think this is an interesting question. You put the example of to be a mom. So in this example, of course, the woman is advantage totally for a woman. But also I think that this system is an advantage for the men, of course, in a different situations. But yes, I think it's for the woman and for the men.
So at the end, it can be a tool for everybody who is looking for a good work-life balance and trying to use technology strategically as a tool for helping them.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. I would like to have a look at our second poll question. What does the audience think that have been the most important challenges? So I think there is a clear message. It is about working time, work intensity, that might be aggravated by the technology or by probably the combination of technology and the mobility. So I find that an interesting result. On the other hand, there is also a good number of our voters here, who point that legislation is an issue here. So we as Eurofound, as a European agency, we are always interested what can we provide for policymakers, any recommendations, any information. So I would like to our panel here now to discuss a little bit from a policy perspective. So there are at European level regulations there. In how far are they fit for purpose for the new developments like ICT-based mobile work? And I would like to start again with Oscar. Can you give us an overview what is available and how does it fit?
Yes. Now we are looking at what regulations are in place in Europe in relation to this form of work. And we have to remember what we mentioned before. Our research shows that when you work occasionally under this arrangement, the outcomes, either work-life balance outcomes or health, are positive. Even productivity are positive. However, when you do this with high intensity, very frequently, working very long, so you devote your life to this, to work thanks to the technology and this flexibility, we see that we have negative results. Therefore, I think it's very clear we have to put limits, okay? Like you try to do in France. We have in Europe, we have the Working Time Directive, it was mentioned before, the framework directive, which prevents health problems, but as it was mentioned also before, they might not be very efficient in this work arrangement. Therefore, that is why France first, but also other countries in Europe have followed the example. And we see now that it is in Western European countries, geographically speaking, or Latin language countries like Spain, Italy, Belgium, also in Portugal. In Portugal, they are discussing the issue. The provision has not been passed, but they are discussing the issue. They have incorporated somehow, in different ways, but they have incorporated the right to disconnect already in the legislation. For example, in Belgium, they do through the health and safety committees, to be discussed in the health and safety committees. In Spain, it's more or less similar to France. And interestingly, in Italy, it is done through an individual contract between what they call the smart worker and the employer. So there will be individual conditions for those working flexibly with ICT. And well, this is the situation in Europe. In other countries like in Scandinavia, the Netherlands, Germany also, they do more, they regulate the issue mostly through sectoral agreements, also company agreements. And it is in the more Central Eastern countries that we see that there are not either legislation to protect workers against these risks, or sometimes there are some company agreements, but of course, what we see, just let me conclude, there is, if we continue like this, there will be like differences between countries. There's how far they are protected in relation to the risks. Because most of these countries have some legislation passed in relation to promoting telework, to promoting telework for work-life balance, for example, but not this approach of protecting workers from the negative effects.
So that means for the time being, we see a combination of both. We have some umbrella at European level, but that obviously is not enough or not specific, so that at least some countries are also doing something at national level, and there we see comparatively different approaches. Can be legislation, yes, can be based on the social partners. And as you mentioned, there are these differences. Would you think there is more need for harmonization? Should there be one European approach to make sure that we have decent working conditions in ICT-based mobile work?
Yeah, as we discussed before, there are some directives that somehow protect workers. I want to add the recent proposal, which was passed already by the Parliament and the Council, on the Work-Life Balance Directive, which includes a provision that gives the right to the parents to request flexible work, reduction of working hours, working flexibly, working in different places for parents. I mean, I would say that something has to be done to be in, let's say, level playing field, that we all work with the same rules. Otherwise, you will have, even in Europe, companies with workers following this new regulation by collective bargaining, for example, on right to disconnect, whereas in others there is no regulation and there is no right to disconnect. So in a way, it's a problem for even for competition between companies. It's not only for workers, but also between companies.
So that means some standards would be good. And this is at the end also a reason why we have these European directives. Now, at the same time, we see that at least some of the directives that you have mentioned at European level, they're quite old. They are 15 years old or longer, which means they kind of predate this very high technology age that we are in and will be even more so in the future. So Oscar mentioned there is one directive on health and safety. Again, back to Emmanuel. From your perspective, do you think this is still fit for purpose, taking into consideration the age and the new development?
Well, from a health and safety perspective, we have more than one directive, but we have the framework directive that you mentioned, which in fact is celebrating its 25-year anniversary this June. And it has proven to be suitable and is still fit for purpose in a way, because it covers all types of employees, all types of employed workers, whether they are mobile or not mobile. So in principle, it is fit for purpose. What it doesn't cover is the self-employed, which in some countries is covered by national additional legislation, but not at EU level from an OSH perspective. So in principle, it's fit for purpose. But in practice, the cornerstone of prevention, which is laid in this directive, is the workplace risk assessment, which is an obligation of the employer. The employer has the responsibility to prevent the occupational risks to their workers and to do the risk assessment. So in practice, it is of course challenging, because if you talk about geographically delocalized workstation, how can the employers access this workstation? And if you talk about teleworking in private home, there is also the issue of the right to entry. At European level, there was a framework agreement on telework, which is also some year old. And there is an implementation report looking at how it has been implemented in the member states. And in fact, in some member states like Poland, Austria or Finland, this is a clear issue, the right, the implementation of this OSH responsibility from an employer perspective. In Poland, for instance, the national OSH rules don't apply in private homes, so for teleworker working from home. In Austria, the employer, the labor inspectorate, OSH specialist don't have the right to entry private home if the worker doesn't want. So there is an issue there. And in fact, we see we have a survey of enterprises, our European survey of enterprises on new and emerging risks, the SNR survey. And from this survey, we see that from the companies that say that they do a risk assessment and that they have people working from home. Only 29% of this company indeed do the risk assessment of their employees working from home. So there is a challenge in practice there.
So again, we see differences
Yeah.
across countries, and we see that there is some further room for improvement. So I would like to ask Anne-Marie, now the friend tried to disconnect. It's there for a few years. Are there some first lessons learned? Can you give some recommendations, what works, what does not work, to make it effective?
Yes, as I just said before, it is soft law. It is based also on negotiation between social partners. So there's a number of companies who signed agreement, but there are also a large number of companies that still do not necessarily have agreements. As I explained, agreements is something, and actual disconnection is something else. So I really think that a major issue is related to workload, work organization. I think the work of qualified white collar mainly has really changed a lot. The work of everybody has changed a lot in the past 10 years, but the work of qualified white collar workers has really changed a lot. But there's been no debate, no investigation on the impact of all these changes. Just for example, in the 1980s, Henry Mintzberg made a famous study on the work of managers, and he said that the sequence of work was 15 minutes, and it was considered as a short sequence of work. There's been a field study in France showing that the average sequence of work for a manager was about 4 minutes, and some of them had a sequence of work of 1 minute 30 seconds. So it's just a question on, of course, psychosocial issues, cognitive and psychosocial issues for those who live with at this pace. But it's also a matter of productivity, because people cannot really deal properly all these interruptions. So beyond regulation, there really is a need for, I don't know, take a step back on what is the work of people now. Is it good work in terms of for the person, but also for the performance of the company? So because we are like going in something that is going faster and faster, but not knowing where it's going to, and there is really an issue on the question of work organization, and I think it's very interesting when saying that when people work at home, for instance, they put time frames like in the old time, from 9 to 6 or something like that. This is a very old and vintage, something a bit vintage, but it's very important to put frames and to say, well, I have a tennis, or I have something else to do in my private life at 6:30, so I will stop working at 6. I think it's something very important.
So that also means it's for the individual worker to develop or be more aware of oneself and develop some kind of self-discipline of, say, now I just go and the next 10 emails, they come, I deal with them tomorrow and nothing else will happen.
Yeah, but it's also a collective issue, because in France there's been a very interesting report for the Labour Ministry by Bruno Metling, who was Human Resources Manager at Orange, saying that disconnection is an individual issue, but it's also a collective issue. Some people will be more at ease with disconnecting, and other, there's a social pressure. The famous FOMO, there is a social pressure to keep connected. And we see that in companies, if, for instance, managers send emails in the weekend, people feel obliged to look at their email during the weekend. If it's not the case, then, so there is also a collective issue, but it's really changing things on different, we have to enter on the subject by different sides.
I think that's very important to really have this in mind. It's a more comprehensive topic than just that what the technology allows us. It's also how we use it and how we want to use it and to make our work and life easy and more convenient. We have here another very interesting question from Nikita from the European Youth Forum, who flexed the point that what about youth? Youth tend to be even more connected. They are almost born with their smartphone close to them. So are we developing special measures for youth? Are you aware about any instruments where we make sure that notably young labor market entrants are not trapped in this kind of vicious circle of I need to be connected, I need to be available all the time?
I just, then of course you can... But I just want to make a point here, just to give one example from another continent. Well, we made a global research with the ILO some years ago, and this joint report we have information from the United States, and there was a poll in this country among young workers, saying very clearly that I think it was in the service sector, the majority of them, in working hours, they spend almost half of the time doing things related to the social relationships. But these young workers also who were outside the workplace, they spend almost 50% of their time working with using the ICT tools. So my question is are younger generations like more familiar with this flexible work, blurring boundaries? They can cope better with that. Because this is, I mean, I was impressed by these results. I don't know if it's going to be the future. I don't know what is your opinion, just about these young workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will see at long term, and I think the group of the so-called digital native is an interesting group to start studying, in fact, because as you say, since a very early age, they have a very different behavior towards this strategy. But what I can tell is that there are, from the literature, you can find indication that already children start developing arthros at a much earlier age in the fingers because of the intense use of such technologies. There are also indications that the age of burnout is getting down. So yeah, I think it's a group that we have to target.
Just the problem with education is that we discover new ICT at the same time as the young. I mean, we have 10 years ago we could not teach people how to deal with social networks because there were no social networks. So there is. I was talking about a step back, and we don't have this step back to be able to educate children. I mean, for instance, on nutrition. Usually parents have some step backs to say, well, don't just eat sweets, eat what you don't like, eat greens and all these things because it's good for you.
Normally it doesn't work, actually. So I don't know with the ICT, but...
Anyway, you invite them to the good restaurant to discover that it can be good. But for ICT, adults are discovering the new ICT at the same time as the children. And are discovering the advantages, but also the dark sides of this ICT at the same time as the young. So this is quite difficult to educate because unusually young people master all this so much better. And yes, they get addict. They get addict to online games and all these things. Just long before being at work, they are already addicts and really with all the symptoms of addiction. So.
I would like to talk something about this because as a worker, as a worker that I use this technology, I notice the disadvantages that we talked before about the stress and an addiction to work. But at the same time, I can see I'm mom I'm a mom of a daughter of 5 years old, and I can see how she's a reflection of me, because she shows me all time with technology in my hand, connected by internet, working at home with my computer. So she wants to have a computer already. She wants, in fact, she has already a game computer and a mobile that is not working, but she tried to be me. So I realized that we need to be trained how to use it, but they need to be trained also in the school, because they are growing up with this technology, and they need to be teach how to manage and to get the benefits of this technology.
There is really a need to teach children to disconnect.
Yes.
Because some of them really, I think, to very precise situation, it's when you say no, stop. You have had your 3 hours of game, online game today. It's enough. You will not have 1 minute more, and it's a terrible moment. It's just it's just a big crisis at home.
I will take the opportunity to mention one health and safety concern that I didn't mention, and to which children are even more sensitive. It is the so-called blue light emitted from screens, from laptops, from tablets, from smartphones. In fact, there is a French national agency, the ANSES, that has very recently published an updated evaluation of this blue light, and that emphasized that these screens are major sources of this type of light, and that this type of light has a very negative impact on the retina of the eye and increases the risk of developing macular degeneration much earlier. And of course, they recommend to limit the exposure time to these devices, so which is true for workers, and they especially emphasize the specific sensitivity of children as a very important group. So, and this blue light has also impact on biological rhythm and on sleeping disorder. So.
Well, I guess then our joint answer to Nikita is we don't know about any specific measures targeting the youth, but at least in this group there seems to be some awareness, some information available that there are higher risks for the younger people, and that is not only limited to the workplace, that even starts earlier. So if I understand you correctly, what the suggestion would be is to start even earlier, from very young children on, to create a better awareness of how to healthy use technologies. So that can start in the families, that can start in kindergartens or in school, that we might need to rethink there how we deal with technologies.
I would add, at EU OSHA, we have a program of work which is mainstreaming occupational safety and health into education. So we've worked with schools and developing program for early education on other topics than this digital technology. But we have produced a series of short videos, which is called NAPO, with like a worker exposed to different situations, which is not originally meant for children, it's for workers, but children love it. So I think we can take as maybe like a mandate for our agency maybe to produce an app on, digital tool for...
Another related question to that, which links more to what you have said. So Jacob from the UK wants to also asking about this kind of awareness level, whether there is some campaigns going on to increase at the company level the awareness, so that, for example, co-workers don't put pressure among themselves. Or we had the examples previously about managers sending emails. So is there something going on, any campaigns, any measures that you know, either at European level or at national levels?
Well, I can tell that there will be a campaign at European level, which we are starting to prepare. And well, there will be a campaign from next year, specifically looking at the musculoskeletal disorder issue, but also it's linked to psychosocial issues and stress. And we have a dedicated project looking at new technologies and musculoskeletal disorders. So this campaign on musculoskeletal disorders will partly address that. And we will have from 2023 a major European campaign on digitalization more broadly, running for 2 or 3 years. So there is certainly scope from next year onwards to cover that in a European campaign.
So we have something in the
Yeah.
pipeline, and we're looking forward to that. Very good. Now, it occurs to me we're again only talking employees in a nutshell. So back to Sabina, if you could launch a wish list to policymakers, what would you ask there to better support self-employed who are working with these new technologies? Could there be something that they could do for you?
Yes, yes. I think regulations, it's imprescindible nowadays because we need to be aware of how to manage this system of work, and we are not conscious because we grow up and this technology get into our lives without previous education. So I think now it's the moment to have a help regulating and advising the workers how to manage with these systems. Also to train the worker as a worker, myself. I would like to know how to manage myself with this and recommendations to use it and to get the best from them and to avoiding stress and addiction to work. And the third thing is maybe help with a renting office. So it makes the possibility to the workers to go back and if they want, decide to have a place to work. When you leave this place, you disconnect. Sometimes you cannot reach this kind of work because of the expensive arrangements and so then you decide to find a mobile solution. So I think also to help in this could be useful for us.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting because we have another question here who asks, what kind of support should there be? Is it legislation? Is it support, as you just suggested, help me find a co-working space, for example, or should it be more dealing with instruments at company level? So would you have any opinions there? Where should be the entry point if we wanted to make ICT-based mobile work more workable?
Yes, I will try to answer that, but before I want to highlight something about working time. And I think one of the reasons why, Marie mentioned before that the existing legislation on working time is not effective in relation to prevent, long working hours, etc. It is that the Working Time Directive considers working time as a binary concept. So either you are working or not. So there's no something in between. And we learned from our research and the example I mentioned of the young workers in the US that there's a high porosity of working time and non-working time. So it's very difficult to distinguish what's working time and what is not working time. Another issue related to this is how you have the problem with health and safety, but also in terms of working time. How do you record working time? How long this mobile worker has been working during the day? Who can tell that? How you monitor that? How the company controls the working time? Without speaking about the data protection issue that is related to control. So having said that, I think something has to be answering your question in relation to regulation. I don't know, it should be EU level. At least EU level should have a discussion at EU level. But of course, when you go to the company level, and you mentioned before that in some companies in France, they reach collective agreement, but if not, the employer have to write a charter. How this is implemented? I mean, I ask myself the question, because even if you have this agreement, it might be the case that some workers, on their own initiatives, try to work flexibly anytime, even if they have this right to disconnect. This is a difficult, good question, difficult answer.
Just on that subject, we can see that according to the companies and the agreements, it can be more or less, I would say, I gave the example of Orange, who say, well, the cause to disconnection is related to workload. And the workload, well, it's not just the people who have to regulate their workload. Let's try to get to work together to find ways so that people are, have a better workload regulation, better balance. So this is a way to enter to the subject. But there are other agreements which take it another way. For instance, the tire company Michelin, they have an agreement on which they say, well, if someone is working out of the working hours once, it just give an alert. After 2 alerts, he has to meet his hierarchy. They have to discuss together. So at this time, the ICT is used as a system to alert on the connection, and they enter this way. So there are different ways to enter. So to explain, but yes, there are different ways. But at the present time, yes, how to make things real is that yes, there's a black box, which is the work of people. There is a black box, and we have to enter in the black box. By one way or another way, we have to enter in the black box and understand what are the real causes for disconnection. Of course, it can be, like for children, a form of addiction, but most of the time it's related to the social pressure to keep connected, either because they didn't have time to do the work. For myself, there are some persons with who I work with our managers, and frequently I receive an email from them. I reply to the email, and I receive the auto-reply out of office because of holidays, and I say, yes, okay, you are dealing with your emails during your holidays. That's really a very frequent situation, and it's because people just take their holidays to do what they did not have the time to do before. Because my previous email stayed 2 weeks with no answer.
And we all know this situation, I guess. But so I think the answer to that question is it should be a combination. On the one hand, we need to have a regulatory framework, but that is not enough there. It also is about the implementation, and that's where the company level, the line manager, but also the individual worker comes in and has their responsibility. Okay, so thanks for that. Well, we are now approaching the end of our webinar, so I would like to ask all of you to give us a final statement. What are your takeaways of today's discussion? What did you find particularly interesting? What was new for you? What did you learn? Or what would you like to recommend either to policymakers or to the audience? Would you like to start?
Okay. My main point of this meeting for me is that to get conscious of how this technology is in our lives, and to be aware and to have conscious how to use it, because it's a very interesting tool, but we need to train a little bit to get the best of this and to manage how to use that this tool is not against us as a person and as a professional. So to get the best benefits of this tool. For me, it's interesting. And also, I want to remark that for me, in my opinion, it's very interesting that this information, this system has to be integrated in the schools, and the children has to grow up with the knowledge because they are our future. So this tool is going to the future. Is going to be bigger and bigger. So they need to have information how to manage. It's very important for us and for them.
Thank you, Oscar.
Well, I have to first say that I find exciting the technological developments. And they are very useful for work. They are very useful for our personal life, and in this way, as we mentioned before, have positive consequences. For example, yesterday I was in a training of a Skype business, which I think it was, amazing how you can have meetings anytime, anywhere. What we're talking about, this is another factor which when we say the technology is helping to develop this work arrangement, this is one example, one specific example. So my point is that because of this technological development, and also because digitalization is being more and more penetrating the world of work, we know the so-called platform work, even automation, are based more and more on digital technologies, and this brings also flexibility. So it's not for ICT-based mobile work, but for other areas of digitalization, we see more flexibility at work, because the technology basically what allows is flexibility, to be virtually anywhere, anytime. Because it has downsides, I think really it is needed some kind of regulation. That will be my final word.
Thank you. Manuel?
Well, for me, I think it's clear that ICT-based mobile work is, as such, neither good or bad. It can be used or misused. And I think it's very important how it is implemented, the context, in particular, the organizational context in which it is implemented. So I like very much, in that sense, the work done by ANACT, emphasizing the cause, looking at the causes behind that and this organizational context. There was this question about whether regulation or combination. I think it's clear that technology is advancing much further than regulation, and it's logical in a way, because establishing a regulation is a tripartite matter in the case of occupational safety and health, so it's a lengthy process. So I think it's very important to have a combination of different actions, as we mentioned, including awareness raising. I think it's clear from the question on young workers, from your experience as self-employed, from how to have managers and workers being more aware about the potential drawbacks of such technology. I think there is a strong need for awareness raising and for practical recommendation. And that's what EU OSHA wants to do in the next campaign, so I hope we can help to that.
Thank you. Anne-Marie?
Well, I'm afraid I will repeat a bit the same thing. In the way that, yes, there are very good sides of ICT mobile work. I mean, telework can be interesting for many reasons. And also there are downsides also. So I also think that raising awareness, educating at school, at work. We spoke about disconnection. In some companies, there is also a duty to disconnect during the meetings, for instance. Yeah, when you are at the meeting, you are not doing your emails during the meeting. So at work, you also have the duty to disconnect. So there are many forms of actions, but there is a real need, yes, to go closer to the actual work of people, to get into the black box, as I said, to really make it possible to disconnect. So I think it's the awareness campaigns are very important. I think it's because also for workers and for employers, it's still not so much sometimes an issue. You need to have bad situations to say, yes, it's a problem. Yeah. Usually it's when the accident has happened that we say we had to do something. So.
Okay, well, thank you for that. So I think we learned a lot in today's webinar. We got familiar with this concept of the ICT-based mobile worker. We learned it's about a fifth of all European workers who are already using this work arrangement, and we assume that in the future it will be even more. It probably would be something for everybody, so we should be interested in learning more about it. And at the same time, we see it has a good number of advantages, notably related to flexibility, autonomy, control about one's life, and that really means how to combine the working life and the private life. But at the same time, we also see that there are some paradoxical developments, meaning that at the same time we have higher working hours in this work model, that there might be more stress, more burnout, and we have, while those developments are not necessarily new, also some new emerging trends, like we discussed the virtual presenteeism as a new danger. There seems to be some awareness, both of the positive sides, but also the negative sides. But the big message now was we need to have more awareness raising. And I think that requires all the levels, at the policymakers, at employers level, at the individual, but also for families, so also in the private life. And there are some campaigns already going on or would be started quite soon, but there seems more room for improvement as to this regard. I think an important message also was that while we are talking here about the future of work in a digital age, the technologies are not everything. It is about work organization, it is about culture, it is about the individual also taking responsibility. So I think it's also to flag the point that we need to see the bigger picture all the time, not only talking about digitalization or technologies. There were a good number of examples mentioned, both as it is done at company level, but also as it can be done in policies. And I think they've been very interesting. And if you want to have more information, we can provide links or documents for specifying that. And we are also aware that there were a lot of questions from you, from the audience, that we could not discuss in this hour and a half. We will try to do our best to give feedback to them in writing, either from our side as Eurofound or by asking our panelists to give some feedback on that. So we would invite you to keep an eye on our webpage. About next week, we will try to answer those questions. There will also be some written key takeaways summarizing what our panelists said, but also more generally. And you will also find some publications on the topic, as for example, a quantitative analysis of Eurofound's European Working Conditions Survey, specifically dealing with the concept of ICT-based mobile worker, but also some publications that have been mentioned by our panelists here. So I would like to thank again both our panelists and you as our virtual audience for your attention, for your active involvement here. I hope we stay in contact, so you would also be encouraged to sign into our publications alert list so that you can keep informed about topics that might be related to the ICT-based mobile work, more generally on digitalization, or even more generally on working and living conditions in Europe. So thank you very much for your attention and have a good afternoon.